Vietnam, 1972. U.S. Navy and Air Force tactical air crew renew the American bombing offensive against communist North Vietnam. By now, the air defense system over that nation has become one of the most formidable in the world. For air crew shot down, the outlook is bleak. Capture means almost certain imprisonment in the infamous Hanoi Hilton. But there is hope. Each aircrew member is equipped with a rescue beacon which starts transmitting as soon as he ejects. And with this beacon comes the chance of safety as a well-honed rescue operation swings into action. The rescue effort in Southeast Asia began as a small affair, but as U.S. losses mounted, so the matter gained importance. The need arose for an armed team to extract the downed aircrew. The basic principles called for a helicopter to move in to pick up the survivors under cover of attack aircraft. Providing fire support was the task of the Sky Raiders, codenamed Sandy. The big Sikorsky rescue helicopters were called Jolly Green Giants, or Jollies for short. The rescue team became the most respected in the Air Force, as its mission was widely regarded as the most dangerous of the war. Both the Sandy and the Jolly had to expose themselves to fire during the actual extraction of the downed airmen. Many brave Sky Raider and helicopter crews lost their lives in the attempts to prevent their comrades from falling into the hands of the enemy. The high number of downed airmen who were successfully saved, often in the face of massive odds, stands as the greatest testimony to these men who went out day after day to risk and often lose their lives so that others may live. Dedicated air rescue squadrons originated from World War II. For air crew conducting the air war against Germany, the chances of rescue, if they were shot down over occupied Europe, were practically nil. But if their aircraft was damaged and they managed to nurse their crippled bomber back over the sea and ditch, they stood a much higher likelihood of survival. In 1941, an Air-Sea Rescue Directorate equipped with aircraft and launches was set up by the Royal Air Force with the specific purpose of saving downed aircrew. Later in the war, the U.S. 8th Air Force also added its resources to this system to save its bomber crews. Special radio stations on the coast of Britain enabled precise bearings to be made on the location of a downed bomber, a process known as triangulation. Once they had ditched their aircraft, many of these valuable aircrew had been lost. They had died in their dinghies through exposure and not being picked up. From the Fleet Air Arm came the idea of using flying boats to actually land and pick up the survivors, given a reasonable state of the sea. This often saved hours of time, a valuable commodity with wounded or hypothermic victims. The British Walrus became especially valuable in this role, while the Americans used the superb Catalina. Air-Sea Rescue quickly proved its worth. Within 6 months of its formation, the percentage of ditched aircrew who were saved rose from 20 to 33%. other methods of rescuing aircrew were developed. If it was too dangerous to pick up survivors, specially modified bombers were used to drop airborne lifeboats. These had their own gas-driven engines, as well as sails, dry clothing, a radio, and medical supplies. Once aboard, the crew could quickly get underway and pull away from the hostile coast to a point out of the range of the enemy guns. Then they rendezvoused with an RAF rescue launch boat, which had been diverted to pick them up. The Axis powers also set up a similar system to rescue their airmen. Seaplanes were almost exclusively used in the air-sea rescue role, known as Seenodienst. One of the major early types was the HE-59 biplane, which flew rescue missions in the English Channel during the Battle of Britain. Another type was the twin-engine Dornier DO-18 flying boat. It was later replaced by the more capable DO-24. Capable of operating in severe sea states, this rugged three-engine design excelled as a rescue machine. It served in all major European war theaters, from the Arctic to the English Channel and the Mediterranean. The DO-24 carried out many epic rescues, including that of a ditched weather flight 600 kilometers out into the Atlantic. The Dornier was supplemented by the Heinkel HE-115. By the last months of World War II, losses of these rescue seaplanes to Allied fighters were mounting, and the German Rescue Organization formed its own defense unit with twin-engine Messerschmitt fighters to cover the rescue efforts. In the Mediterranean and North African theaters, this was also carried out by Italian CANT float planes. Once casualties had arrived, they often needed additional medical care, for which role light transports like the Dominier were converted to serve as air ambulances. In the Pacific Theater, the task of rescuing Allied survivors from ships and ditched combat aircraft was even more demanding due to the extreme oceanic distances involved. With its excellent long range and endurance, the Catalina was by far the most important U.S. rescue aircraft, picking up hundreds of survivors of the great naval and air battles which took place in the Pacific. But even as the seaplane was making its mark as a rescue machine during World War II, a completely new type of aircraft was being developed, which introduced a great advance in modern search and rescue techniques, the helicopter. It brought new possibilities for the extraction of survivors with its ability to take off and land vertically. Much pioneering work was done in the States by Russian immigrant Igor Sikorsky, who developed a truly practical design. The VS-300 made its first successfully tethered flight in September of 1939 and achieved controlled free flight a year and a half later. The go-ahead was given for development of a military helicopter, the XR-4, which was evaluated in 1942. In service with the U.S. Army Air Force, the R-4 made the world's first helicopter rescue in 1944 when it picked up 4 occupants of a light aircraft which had crashed behind Japanese lines in Burma. The R-4 and a development, the R-5, eventually also served with the U.S. Navy and Britain's Fleet Air Arm. During the time of the Korean War in 1950, the helicopter truly came of age as a useful military machine. Although it served most widely in the casualty evacuation role, combat rescue was also carried out by U.S. Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps R-5s and H-19s. The helicopter also demonstrated its ability to serve in the humanitarian role, rescuing civilians. In November 1945, an R-5, flown by Sikorsky's test pilot, Jimmy Viner, rescued seamen from an oil-laden barge which had run aground off the coast of Connecticut. From the beginning, Sikorsky had been inspired that his machines would be used for rescue purposes. It looked as if his dream had come true at last. The use of the helicopter in the rescue role in the Korean War highlighted the possibilities of its application in the UK. This coincided with the RAF expansion in the mid-50s and the increasing cost of aircrew training. The Fleet Air Arm was already acquiring extensive experience with helicopters, and in 1953 a dedicated air-sea rescue unit was again formed in the RAF. Initially equipped with Sycamores and Dragonflies, it became fully operational in 1959 with the Whirlwind, a Sikorsky H-19 built under license by Westland. One of the most spectacular developments which had possible applications for the rescue of downed airmen in Vietnam was the Fulton recovery technique. It was originally used as a means of recovering reconnaissance drones and film magazines ejected by satellite. In Vietnam, the technique was used operationally to extract Special Forces troops. Following the success of its combat rescue helicopters in Vietnam, the U.S. Air Force remained the sole air arm in the world to maintain combat search and rescue, CSAR, assets on such a widespread scale. In Vietnam, the U.S. Air Force had used two main types of Sikorsky rescue helicopter, the HH-3 and the HH-53 Super Jolly Green Giant. The smaller HH-3E had entered service in 1965 and proved to be exceptionally long-lived. It was not retired from the Air Force's aerospace recovery and rescue squadrons around the world until as late as 1994. While HH-3 crews continued to practice their rescue missions in the continental U.S., Alaska, Europe, and the Pacific, the helicopter was slowly giving way to the HH-53. Bigger and faster, this introduced greater flexibility as it could carry a heavier fuel load, thus increasing range, more armor protection, and better defensive armament. It became the logical choice for further development. The HH-53 was consistently upgraded from the 1970s with ever-sophisticated all-weather navigation and avionics systems and increased self-protection. The distinctively yellow-painted Royal Air Force search and rescue helicopters have prominently come to the attention of the British public for almost 4 decades. Though not involved in combat rescue, their tasks are very operational in flying terms, involving some of the most hazardous flying, both in peacetime and in war. Although primarily maintained for the rescue of service aircrew in distress, they have made the largest and most dramatic contribution to British rescue services, saving thousands of civilians around the English coasts, from ships at sea, from mountain climbing accidents, and in rushing critically ill patients to specialist hospitals. Search and rescue is also an important secondary role for the Falcon maritime patrol aircraft of the Aero Naval, which are tasked with long-range rescue of personnel from ships in distress far out to sea. The helicopter has now become the most widely used type of aircraft to conduct search and rescue operations. The following 2 cases illustrate the commitment of military rescue forces to saving both service personnel and civilians in distress. This South African Air Force Puma helicopter is practicing with local lifeboat services. This rescue is for real. Stricken guests of a burning hotel anxiously await rescue from a window parapet as a Puma moves in to pick them up, hovering dangerously close to the flames. The newest type of search and rescue helicopter currently in service with the U.S. military is another Sikorsky product, based on the U.S. Army's Black Hawk assault transport helicopter. The U.S. Navy has the HH-60 Rescue Hawk, a version of the Air Force's standard rescue machine, the MH-60 Pave Hawk. Both types are extensively equipped with advanced avionics and cockpit systems to fly and navigate at night and in adverse weather conditions. This capability also makes them ideal for the infiltration, exfiltration of special forces. Both saw combat service during Operation Desert Storm. The U.S. Air Force's primary long-range rescue helicopter is the latest development of the Super Jolly Green Giant, the MH-53J. Recently, the activities of the rescue squadrons have been integrated with those of Special Operations Forces, and the PAVE Low is used for both combat rescue and long-range covert transport of Special Forces at night and in adverse weather. These capabilities were fully tested recently during a spectacular rescue operation in Bosnia when U.S. forces effected the rescue of downed Air Force F-16 pilot Captain Scott O'Grady.
The men and women of the Navy and the Marines came in there and saved me. And if you want to find some heroes, that's where you should look, because those are the biggest heroes in the world. As far as if you want to ask me who the hero is. Again, thank you, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Like the arrival of the helicopter nearly 60 years ago, it is the development of a new type of aircraft which may herald the next revolution in search and rescue, the tilt-rotor aircraft. Able to take off and land like a helicopter, yet fly at speeds of an ordinary turboprop transport, the V-22 Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft is being developed for the U.S. military for a variety of roles, among which is search and rescue. Although the machinery may be new, the basic mission remains the same: rescue of personnel in distress by a team of brave and dedicated professionals so that others may live.